The future for any kind of Big 12 expansion is probably 5 years away at this point. Welcome in. I'm Pete Mundo. We're Heartland College Sports, where we cover the Big 12 Conference. So here's the deal. The ACC finally settled all of its litigation issues, and that impacts the Big 12 Conference and what the Big 12 is likely to do over the next 5-6 years. So I'm going to break down this timeline for you here on Heartland College Sports and take you through this thing so you can get a realistic look on what all of this means for the next 5 years. We're not going to just throw stuff against the wall and say, you know what, guys, I think there's a chance that the Big 12 can add Alabama if, come on, I'm not going to do it. I'm not. I actually think that a show can be informative, entertaining, funny, lighthearted, without being insanely speculative. Now, if there are rumors that drop, I will talk about them, but I won't be making things up here because that is not what we do. By the way, what I would love for you to do, if you're consuming us on YouTube, is hit the like button right now. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. Same thing with Apple, if you're on there, or Spotify. Drop that 5-star rating and review. I'm looking at my phone because we are giving away a free Heartland College Sports t-shirt to the best commenter that we get on our Apple podcasts. And what will you get? Well, you will get this shirt right here I'm holding up on YouTube. SEC, undefeated in hypothetical games. So make sure to drop us that 5-star rating and review. And thank you, as always, to our radio affiliates for hopping on as well. And that shirt will also be linked in the comments. So here's the timeline now with the new ACC deal. What happens now is Clemson and Florida State, well, they can put down the pitchforks, at least until 2029, 2030. That's when the total cost to exit the ACC is expected to drop below $100 million, which is less than half of the current price tag. That, of course, is what had the Tigers and the Seminoles going nuts. Because currently, their deal with ESPN and this grant of rights goes through 2036. And these two programs in particular are like, you know what? We're not sure we want to be here in 2036. So they were able to come to this settlement where the deal, the buyout, goes down $18 million every year through 2029, 2030, and the final number will come in at about $75 million. All right? So that's where this thing stands right now. So what does this mean then for the Big 12? What this means for the Big 12 and probably the rest of college football, barring something unforeseen, is that we're going to be in a situation where nothing's going to happen for the next 5 years. Now, the caveat is this. The Big Ten and the SEC could come together, could join forces, and do this crazy superpower conference. They could go for NFL light with just those two conferences. But for the time being, what I would expect to happen and what I would expect to see at this point is basically things stay where they are for at least the next couple of seasons. We don't even know what the college football playoff is going to look like this year. Like, we're going to be playing college football playoff games in 9 months, and no one knows what the format is going to be. Like, we don't know if 1 through 4 is going to be the top 4 teams or if it's going to be the top 4 conference champions. They're still trying to figure that out. So this sport is literally changing by the month in front of our eyes. That's what's happening right now in college football. So to act like any of us can predict 5-6 years from now is insane. But that's why I'm saying this new timeline matters. What this new timeline is about the Big 12 being able to reevaluate itself over the next few seasons and figure out what its best move is going to be. Now, what I'm looking at, too, is a TV contract perspective. This also matters in this conversation. So this conversation needs to talk about where the Big 12's television contract is. The Big 12 TV deal ends in 2031. ESPN's media rights deal with the ACC is through 2036. The Big Ten's contract is coming to a close a year later, and the SEC's is 2034. So we've got Big 12 in 2031, Big Ten in 2032, SEC in 2034, and the ACC in 2036. That is a good position to be in for the Big 12. The money is likely to be more astronomical at that point. The buyouts will be somewhat more reasonable for the ACC schools, where the Big 12 may be in a position to say, you know what? If the writing's on the wall, if Florida State and Clemson are out, well, guess what? Maybe there's room for us somewhere. Maybe somebody else, whether it's Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, Pittsburgh, whoever. Maybe it's all basketball. Maybe it's Duke, North Carolina. I don't know. That's all speculative at this point. But that's when those conversations can be had, because the Big 12 is going to be first to market on the TV contract, which is a good place to be. Remember, the Big 12 beat the Pac-12 to market a few years ago, and that helped them survive while the Pac-12 completely collapsed. I guess there is a Pac-12, but, you get the point. So that's how this all plays out. And that's why the next few years are probably going to be quieter unless the SEC and the Big Ten decide otherwise. They mostly hold all the cards here. If they want to go super power conference, they're going to do it, and none of the other stuff matters. If we get a status quo for a period of time and people are happy for the next few years and TV partners are satisfied, then you end up in a situation where maybe the Big 12 is the next conference to make a move early in the 2030s when their TV deal comes up. That is probably what we're looking at here over the next couple of options. Next couple of years, at least in the next couple of cycles. Some of you guys are throwing out some wild rumors about Florida State and Clemson and Tech and Oklahoma State and deals with the SEC. Listen, I'm not going to go down that road. I have not heard any of that. I would be happy to hear a source on that, like a good source, a legitimate source on that. Not some of the wild sources out there just farming for your clicks or farming for your views on YouTube or your downloads on the podcast or whatever it might be. But if you've got a story I have not seen, please fire away. I'm happy to look at it. But if I was the Big 12, I would just hang tight, because it's entirely possible they're the ones in a situation in a few years from now who might be saying, hey, why can't we get Florida State and Clemson? And this is going to be the challenge for the Big 12 right now. The challenge for the Big 12 is going to be, as we've talked about, what does this thing look like from the standpoint of finding programs that can compete at the very top year in, year out, finding teams that are going to be your new blue bloods. It is great to have a conference that is full of parity like the Big 12. We love it. It makes for a very exciting regular season, but you still got to find those brands that are going to carry you. Every conference needs them. And you can make a bet that it's any of probably 6 to 8 teams. You could say, why not Arizona State? You could say, why not BYU? Iowa State with Matt Campbell, Kansas State, Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State. Can they bounce back? We would have talked about them a year ago. I still think TCU is a team that should be in the conversation. Texas Tech obviously is happy to spend a lot of money. Utah fans are going to say, don't forget about us. And if everything comes together in Morgantown, West Virginia is saying, hey, up here, over here. And yes, I'm including Oklahoma State. I know it was a disastrous year for Mike Gundy last year, but I can't take away 15 years of success, including Big 12 championships, national title conversations, and, basically being one of the best and most consistent teams in the Big 12 for a decade and a half. I can't say that unravels because of one bad year. And it wasn't a bad year. It was an awful year. But I can't say that right now for the Big 12 conference. I still think that Oklahoma State is going to be a contender. But here's the thing. If Gundy has a really bad year, like if he goes 2-7, and suddenly Mike Gundy is 2-16 over his last 2 Big 12 seasons in conference play, then it's fair to say, what are we doing here? Like, I don't foresee Oklahoma State falling off the cliff like that. But also, if you were to rank these teams right now, you would not have Oklahoma State anywhere near the top of the Big 12. There's very little to suggest that's going to happen. However, what Oklahoma State fans and really every Big 12 fan base can rightfully say and rightfully claim after last year is we're going to be Arizona State. We are going to be the team that finished at the bottom of the preseason polling, which is where Arizona State was, and we're going to win the whole damn thing. Arizona State in 2024 is a program that Big 12 teams will be talking about for years to come because every locker room is going to say, remember those Sun Devils? No one saw them coming. Picked dead last by the media. Nobody knows what they're talking about. We've got the goods. And eventually, that will peter off. But there will be an element to that is going to hover around the Big 12 for, I believe, many years to come. I'm Pete Mundo. We are Heartland College Sports. We are glad you are here. Many of you are already asking about the shirt. And yes, we will link to it in the bio. SEC, undefeated in hypothetical games. It'll be up in the description of the show. So thank you guys for that. Make sure you are subscribed right now to the channel. And we always appreciate our radio affiliates as well being here for a part of the show. Now, with all this being said, where are we at right now when it comes to the Big 12 this week? Well, Kansas just continues to get in its own way. I mean, Kansas basketball is right now an afterthought in this conference, which is crazy. I am fascinated to see where exactly Kansas fans are when it comes to the Big 12 tournament next week in Kansas City. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out. We know that KU is not going to be in a double bye situation. They're going to be playing either the first or second day of the Big 12 tournament. They have absolutely no juice behind them right now. I mean, the fan base is kind of over this program. They play Arizona this weekend after losing to Houston on Big Monday. And it was one of those moments where, there's a great face palm emoji of Bill Self. I mean, it's not an emoji. It's a screenshot of Bill Self during the game. And it's like, man, that is Kansas basketball in a nutshell this season. Matthew Postins wrote about it on the website. They are an absolute, utter mess. And it's just amazing because Houston crushed them with 17 offensive rebounds. This team could not get out of its own way if it tried. It's just, I'm watching this and I'm like, my gosh, you got Hunter Dickinson, one of the highest paid guys in college basketball, and you're getting pounded by Houston with 17 offensive rebounds. And yes, we can talk about now the players being paid like this. I'm not saying you can harass them, you can abuse them online, none of that stuff. That's totally inappropriate for any athlete, for heck, any human being. But hey, the players wanted to get paid. We can now say Hunter Dickinson is making a lot of money. The reports, the rumors are out there as to how much money he's making. And guess what? For what they're paying him, he ain't living up to the hype. He almost looks like he has regressed at times this year. That is what Hunter Dickinson looks like. And now you're this Kansas team and you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, gosh, I mean, what could possibly go right for us at this point? It was 4 games ago after a BYU blowout that Bill Self declared this a new season. And they beat Oklahoma State by 30. They beat Colorado by 7. And since then, what's happened? They lost to Tech at home. They lost to Houston on the road. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but obviously they got a tough game against Arizona on Saturday. It's at Allen Fieldhouse, but suddenly that does not have the mystique that it used to have anymore. So all of these things are happening right now in real time, and you're saying, what can Kansas really do in the NCAA tournament? They might be 10-10 in Big 12 play when all is said and done. Think about that. The Kansas Jayhawks, a pedestrian 10-10 in Big 12 play. Who would have ever predicted that? Then, you got Bill Self admitting in the last couple of days, he probably should have avoided a comment on the awful DMs that Zeke Mayo shared on his social media that then he later deleted. Bill Self's like, yeah, I probably brought more attention to it. I felt like the attacks were unfair. Kansas doesn't know how to handle this moment. Heck, I don't know if Bill Self knows how to handle this moment. This is such a weird place for Kansas basketball to be, where the mediocrity is obviously following them around. This team is average, and they don't know how to handle the criticism. They don't know what to do about it. Self is putting out statements, clearly with help from the athletic department, admonishing people who are harassing his players. And that's noble. I get it, but he makes a good point. He might have just brought more attention to the whole thing. I'm not saying we should ever excuse anything like that, but it just kind of adds to the drama that has been this season for the Kansas Jayhawks. And to think that this team is poised to make any kind of noise in March, unless they just get the perfect bracket and something goes off where they go to Kansas City next week, they got the Big 12 tournament, and suddenly they're feeling like themselves again, and they're looking like themselves again, and maybe, playing in Kansas City gives them a little pick-me-up. I don't see how this year ends well. I mean, I don't see a team getting to a second weekend. Do you? Do you see a Sweet 16 in this team's future? I don't. So there's just no way that that's going to be the case right now. Meantime, at Utah, CBS Sports' John Rothstein reports that Dallas Mavericks assistant Alex Jensen appears to be the primary candidate with the Utah Athletic Department to replace the fired Craig Smith. Rothstein reports no offer has been made, but he's at the top of the Utes list to replace Craig Smith. Played under Rick Majerus, was an assistant with the Utah Jazz. So that's where the Utah Utes are potentially looking. It's weird because Utah didn't have an awful season. They're not having an awful season in the Big 12. They've actually looked okay at times this year. So, yes, they're going to wrap up the season at BYU. They're going to be an underdog. They'll be expected to lose that game. But all in all, it hasn't been a bad year for Utah based on what the expectations were. So, and heck, they beat BYU earlier in the season. So the whole thing feels like it was not about what this team did this year. Something else was going on with Utah basketball that just doesn't stack up with what this team has gone through and what this team has actually done on the court this season. So those are all the things that need to be figured out when it comes to Utah basketball and what's next for them. Also, wanted to make sure I shared this with you. The next college football playoff committee chair is going to be Baylor Athletic Director Mack Rhoades. So that's a big deal. I mean, I'm trying to think. The last time I think the Big 12 had an AD who was the committee chair of the CFP, I think it would have been Kirby Hocutt at Texas Tech, and that may have been like the initial first ever college football playoff committee. I think that would have been the one that Kirby Hocutt was the chair of. So congratulations to Mack Rhoades. It doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you're kind of the face. You're the guy that gets asked all the questions by ESPN during those selection shows, which, can come with a lot of criticism as well. You really just don't want to look like a doofus. That's the big thing in that role. Don't look like a doofus, and don't be a hypocrite, and don't contradict yourself. And listen, that is easier said than done, because in college football right now, when it comes to this playoff, everybody feels like they're contradicting themselves, because the whole thing is just basically how a group of people feel on a certain day with a massive SEC bias to go along with it. So that's obviously a very tough spot for anybody. But Mack Rhoades, well-spoken, smart guy. I think he's going to handle it really, really well. I'm Pete Mundo. We are Heartland College Sports. We are glad that you are here, as always, as a part of the show. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. That way, you never miss an episode. Thank you guys for being here. We will talk to you soon. Have an absolutely outstanding day, and go Big 12.